Shortly before my mother died at 94, she was holding court one evening in the parlor with some cousins that had driven some distance just to hear the family stories. It seems that my mother was the last of her generation, and before something happened to her, they wanted to hear the family. She was in her glory that night, spinning one story after another, genealogy after genealogy, anecdotal stuff. It was fun to listen to her. But as the stories started to become more contemporary with my own life, I realized that her version of the story was somewhat different than my version of the story. At one point, it got so drastic that I called her on it. I said, Mom, that's not the way it happened. She said, Yes, it is. I said, Mom, I was there. She said, So what? And went on telling the story. That really bothered me. Was she rewriting stories to suit herself? She should know better. Well, it was a few years later. I was preparing a sermon. I wanted to use an illustration from my youth. It was a very difficult memory for me, a time of great disappointment in the midst of high expectation. It was the Final Four of the NCAA basketball tournament. St. Bonaventure University, the Brown Indians at that time, were in the Final Four. A superstar in the making, Bob Lanier, was leading them, star player. Somewhere during the game, he ran into an opponent and severely damaged his knee. Bonnie's won that game, but they lost Bob Lanier for the next game and lost that game. I remember vividly when he crashed to the floor. I was sitting in the living room of the old house, surrounded by Dad and Mom and my brother. There was a huge TV with a very small screen. It was etched in my mind as though I was there again and again whenever I thought about that. I decided that I better do some fact checking with my sermon. I couldn't remember the exact date, and so I got on the net, and sure enough, there it was, in detail. The year 1970, the Final Four. There was a problem, however. By 1970, we had moved into a new house. It could not have been the way I remembered it. No way possible. And what was even more disturbing is there was no way I could make that story fit the new house. It was bizarre. Our stories are like that. We shape them for our own purpose, to suit us. Sometimes for the good, sometimes for the ill. We remember things that particularly hurt us. I find we remember the tragic and the painful more often than the good in the celebrations. And we play those ugly scripts back over and over again in our minds. sometimes I think just to punish ourselves. It's why I've developed a exercise that I use quite often called Your Story. It's an invitation to look at your story, to go back, and what I ask people to do is take a sheet of paper for every decade of their lives and to draw a line on it, and then to chart their life, highs and lows. Start out with the big events, graduations, marriages, children, and on and on. And then to go back and begin to flesh it out a little more as things pop into your head about times that you may have forgotten, and add those to that timeline. The good things on top, the bad things on the bottom. And then go back and ask the question, where was God in the midst of these times? Some of those it will be quite evident, others maybe not. And sometimes you really wonder if God was there at all, and that's okay. The prophets in the past had the same problem. It's been a fascinating exercise over the years that I've used it. I have yet to do it where somebody doesn't come up to me during one of the breaks after doing the exercise and saying, you know, this moment of my life was the darkest moment ever. I didn't think I could get past it. But I did. And I realize now that everything that happened after that event wouldn't have happened in the same way. It might not have happened at all if that event had never happened. And I don't want to trade a moment of what I've experienced just to go back to that moment. It's given people a whole new perspective on life. And so I encourage you this Lenten season to do a little perspective taking, to ask the question, what about my story? How do I remember my life? And where was God present in it? We may be surprised. We may even tell the story a little differently in the future. Enjoy.